In my previous video, I discussed how the Paintress is a very unusual video game villain, because she does not seek power or control or to harm anyone. She just wants to run away to escape into a fairy tale world of her own creation, where she will not have to confront the harsh reality of her son's death. In contrast, at least in some ways, Renoir is a much more typical villain, because his greatest flaw is a need to control. But he is not driven by malevolent motivations. He really does want what is best for his family. He is just not willing to allow them to make their own choices, because their choices are self-destructive. He tries to force his family members to do what he believes is best for them, and it is left up to the audience to decide for themselves whether his actions are justified. Of course, Renoir is not just doing this for their sake, but also for his own sake, because he cannot stand to lose another member of his family, cannot stand the pain that would cause him, and he is willing to destroy the entire world of Clair-Obscur Expedition 33 and everyone in it to accomplish his goals. He reminds me a lot of the character of Sindri from the God of War series, who is another character who is portrayed as overly controlling, trying to influence the behavior of his friends and family, both because he genuinely does care about them and want what is best for them, but also because he just cannot handle the pain he himself experiences when someone he cares about gets hurt. He is trying to protect himself and his own feelings just as much as he is trying to protect his loved ones. Both he and Renoir are morally gray, complicated characters who are portrayed as flawed and human rather than outright villainous. To be clear, this is a video analyzing the real Renoir, the one who came from outside the canvas, not the artificial Renoir who the Paintress painted into the canvas, who is a totally separate character who really deserves a separate analysis. Both versions of Renoir are driven by the exact same motivations, but are attempting to accomplish completely opposite goals. They are both driven by a need to protect their families, even if that means controlling their behavior, using violence to force them to do what he believes is right. However, the painted Renoir is trying to preserve the canvas and thus preserve his painted family, while the real Renoir is trying to erase the canvas and thus save his family from the dangerous temptation it offers. Alright, so out in the so-called real world of Clair-Obscur Expedition 33, there is a war being fought between painters and writers. The nature of this war and the reasons it is being fought is unclear, but its effects are destructive. The Dessendres are a family of painters, and their youngest daughter Alicia, who is described by her sister Clea as someone who enjoys reading, which is perhaps a dangerous activity in a world where writers want to kill you. By the way, that dialogue comes from the Clea Phantom in the Endless Tower. Anyway, Alicia was tricked by and taken advantage of by the writers. We know this because, again, Clea says so explicitly in her dialogue. They took advantage of her naivete to strike at the heart of the Dessendre family, setting a fire in their manor. Alicia would have died in this fire, but she was rescued by her older brother Verso. He sacrificed himself to save her. After the tragic murder of his son by the writers, which hits Renoir just as hard as everyone else, he grieves just as hard as the rest of them. Anyway, after the death of his son, Renoir watches his family fall apart, each of them overcome by grief in different but equally self-destructive ways. Clea, who wages a solitary war against those responsible for her brother's murder, Alicia, who shuts herself up in her room, alone with her guilt and her scars, and Aline, who rejects the pain of the real world and escapes into this canvas, a canvas painted by her son when he was still a child, which is the setting of the game. She comes here to live out a fantasy in which her son never died in the first place. She created painted versions of each of her family members, and how real or alive those painted characters are is left up to the audience to decide. Besides being emotionally very unhealthy, this escapism is also physically dangerous. Every day spent inside a canvas comes with a cost. If someone spends too much time inside one of these painted worlds, it will very literally kill them eventually. In order to save his family from themselves, from their own grief and self-destructive impulses, Renoir attempted to seize control of the situation, to force his wife out of her fantasy world, to force her to confront reality, even if it hurts her in the short term, to save her in the long term. This conflict between husband and wife is the cause of the fracture that shattered the world of the canvas. When he fails to force her out, he decides to erase the entire canvas and everyone inside it instead, so his family could never be tempted by the fantasy world it offers ever again. This is the true source of the gommage, which is threatening the humans of Lumiere with extinction. And again, how villainous you consider those actions to be will entirely depend on how real you consider these painted artificial humans to be. I do believe the story portrays them as sentient and conscious and possessing free will, but that is a conversation for another time. I'm going to keep this video focused on an analysis of Renoir. And the writers very explicitly describe Renoir as a character who needs to feel as if he is in control multiple times in the story. First, if you manage to complete the Endless Tower, you will be rewarded with some extra dialogue from Clea's Phantom here. She is very critical of both her mother and father. Of Renoir, she says, he is terrified of losing more family, and his response is to try and bend everyone to his will. Don't let his fear end up controlling you. During the final confrontation, Maëlle accuses him of something very similar.
I know precisely what's at stake. You want control. You want to feel like you're doing something. You couldn't save Verso, so you want to save us, except you're not.
And Renoir himself essentially admits the same thing in this clip.
I cannot spend another day with living corpses. Since the fire, our family has crumbled. Aline in the canvas. Clea fighting a solitary war. You, a living ghost. Verso's death broke us. I want it to be fixed. I need it to be fixed. I cannot lose you too.
He needs his family to be fixed for his own sake as much as for theirs. This is just as much about his own emotional needs as it is about their well-being. He is going to fix them himself whether they like it or not. He is going to save them even if they hate him for doing it, even if it means destroying all of these innocent people who got caught in the middle through no fault of their own. Something that was interesting to me is that the story itself pretty much 100% takes Renoir's side in this conflict. If, at the end of the game, you choose to follow his example and destroy the canvas, you are rewarded with the happiest possible ending. With the canvas erased, all of the Dessendre family's problems are seemingly erased along with it. Renoir and his wife are reconciled. Everyone has chosen to face their grief in a healthy way. And even all of those painted people who died along with their entire world are shown smiling and waving, like they don't even care about being dead or all of the horrific trauma they faced, just so long as the Dessendre family got to resolve all of their problems. In this ending, there is no visible evidence of lasting conflict or damage anywhere as a result of Renoir's choices. No lingering resentment between family members. Everybody lives happily ever after. With this ending, the writers really seem to be pushing the audience towards accepting the opinion that erasing the canvas is a good thing, that these people's lives don't matter and Renoir is totally vindicated. Everything he did was right, especially when you compare it to the other ending where the canvas is saved, which is far darker and more troubling in tone. This is not a complaint or criticism, just an observation. Of course, this does not mean that the audience has to agree with him, and personally I don't, but again, that is a conversation for another video. For now, let's try and stay focused on how the writers develop Renoir's character. And so let's talk more about that need for control, because it is not just limited to this individual scenario. Take a look at this journal entry. Here, Renoir is speaking directly to his wife. He tells her that he does not care about seeking perfection in art, so long as he gets to go on this journey with her, which is a very sweet sentiment, and shows the audience that this harsh version of Renoir we encounter in the game is not who he always was. There really is a big sweetheart buried in there somewhere who just wants to be with his family. But I do not care about that. I am much more interested in the second half of the journal, where he says,
Art gives us the perception of control. For a moment as I paint, I find order among the chaos. That is, for me, a moment of pure contentment. And that is truly better than perfection.
This is a sentiment I have encountered elsewhere, that maybe we cannot control anything else in our lives, but as creators, we can control the empty canvas or the blank page in front of us. This is one small space we can have absolute total control over, one space that can be made orderly and meaningful and correct. That is Renoir's entire reason for being a painter, and the game offers us several examples of his paintings, and of course his creations tell us a lot about his character. They are the Axons, these fantastical creatures, massive in scale, powerful and beautiful, imposing and seemingly insurmountable. But as Maël says, Renoir never paints just for the sake of painting. Each of his creations is wrapped in layers of parable and metaphor, meaning and purpose. Everything is a lesson. So let's take a closer look at these Axons. There are 4 in the game, each a metaphorical representation of a member of the Dessendre family, which shows us that Renoir is utterly devoted to his family. Everything he says and does is related to them somehow. But the most interesting aspect of these creations is that they are not idealized representations of his family. Instead, the Axons showcase their flaws, their mistakes, and their failings, which reveals that however much he loves and cares for them, he also has a very critical view of his wife and children. He does not view them through rose-tinted glasses. The first Axon you encounter in the game is already dead, killed by Simon long before the start of the prologue. This one is in the form of a giant human carrying a city on its back, and to figure out just who this is meant to represent, we have to speak to the local fading man Phantom. Okay, so all of the phantoms the player will encounter in the game are echoes or shadows of the members of the Dessendre family, their lingering thoughts and feelings stamped into the canvas along with their creations. In the same way that you can find a living fragment of Verso's soul in the canvas, you can also find pieces of each of his family members, anyone who has painted something into this world. Anyway, the Renoir phantom in Old Lumiere near the dead Axon says this: "When she was young, she would get sad thinking about mortality, but when I asked her about her sadness, her answer surprised me. She who painted Nevrons. She was not scared of death itself. She was sad because there are more works of art than she would ever be able to see in her lifetime. So many fables from around the world she would never be able to collect, to bring to life in her workshop. All the beauty in the world she would never get to experience. I encouraged them to believe that their dreams are within their grasp, but she proved me a liar." The she he is referring to is Clea, she who paints Nevrons, and this means that the nearby dead Colossus is meant to represent her. This creature has actually gathered a city of wonders on its back, architecture and stories and experiences, to carry them with her always. It is a walking, living art collection. Or at least it was before it got killed. The Axons are important because they show us how Renoir perceives each of his family members, what he views as their true identity, and to him, Clea is a woman shouldering great weight and pressure and responsibility, and also an artist struggling in the face of mortality, lost in a Sisyphean task that can never be completed, a sort of hopeless romantic figure. And eventually I will do a whole video about her character too. The next Axon we will examine is Visage, or he who guards truth with lies. This is meant to represent his son Verso, the original Verso, whose death set all of these events into motion. Visage shows us that Renoir viewed his son as someone who hid his true feelings behind masks. And in this journal entry, Renoir suggests that Verso was even hiding his true feelings from himself.
Son, you'll never be a true artist if there's always a mask between you and the viewer, especially when the viewer is you.
I think there is also a kind of domineering aspect to Renoir's character revealed in this journal. He is a bit heavy-handed. Anyone who is trying to dictate to others who is and is not a true artist is at least a little bit of an asshole. Anyway, it is very important that Visage is not even the true Axon, but it is actually this guy, the Mask Keeper, who's portrayed as menacing, strange, and deceptive. I think this aspect of hidden identity reveals that the original Verso was something of a mystery to Renoir. He did not really understand his son and seems to have suspected that Verso did not even understand himself. A complicated figure who is careful to never reveal what he really thought or felt about anything to anyone. And this may have been Renoir's fault. We know that Verso felt a great deal of pressure to follow in his parents' footsteps, to become a great painter like them. And we also know that he chose to follow a different path, to pursue music instead. Maybe the real reason he was hiding his true feelings behind a mask all the time was because he was worried about how his overbearing and strict parents would react. Alicia probably spends most of her time shut up in her room hiding from the world for the same reason. But that is all speculation. What is not speculation is how Renoir responded to his son's death, which is revealed by the Phantom in this area, which says, "I would have traded my years for his. His life was cut short. He had so much more to do, to experience. This senseless war, why? To what end? Lives shattered for what? He was innocent. Innocent. It was the folly of his elders, but he paid the price for our hubris." This is one of the very few times in the game when any of the characters actually speak about the war between writers and painters, and he describes it as a senseless, pointless conflict destroying lives for no purpose. This dialogue also reveals that Renoir is carrying a lot of guilt. He blames himself for his son's death. He must have perpetuated the conflict between writers and painters in some way, and this tragedy was the result. He calls his son innocent, which means that Verso probably had nothing to do with the conflict himself. Was someone who got caught in the middle, just like the people of the canvas got caught in the middle of the conflict between the members of the Dessendre family. I think it is also notable that Ciel is the one who ultimately defeats the Mask Keeper, because she is someone who does not hide behind any masks at all, who is always honest and upfront about her feelings. The fact that she is capable of overcoming Renoir's creation, not through battle but through emotional maturity, lends evidence to the idea that she is something more than just an artificial creation, that she is just as real as those who created her. But again, that is a conversation for another time. Moving on, the third Axon we will examine is Sirène, she who plays with wonder, which represents his wife Aline. Her name is the French word for siren, a reference to Greek mythology. The sirens were enchanting creatures who lured sailors to their deaths with their beautiful singing. Sirène is also portrayed as an enchanting figure, surrounded by beauty, perpetually singing and dancing. But the true nature of her temptation is only revealed when our party of heroes engages her in battle. During this cutscene, Sirène attempts to overwhelm the protagonist not through sheer force, but through emotional manipulation. She shows each of them an image of a lost loved one. For example, Maëlle is shown Gustave and Ciel is shown her dead husband. What Sirène tries to do to the expeditioners here is exactly the same thing that the real Aline is doing to herself in the canvas, by creating a new version of her dead son. And ultimately what she does to Maëlle too, becoming entranced by an illusion and unable to pull away. The Phantom in this location says, "As I get older, I wonder, can you truly know someone else? Then again, how many truly know themselves? Is it a blessing to understand your darkest nature, or a curse to which we turn a blind eye? We lie to ourselves all the time, don't we? About things we would rather not admit or confront, about ourselves, about each other. Then there are the things we genuinely don't see. I wonder, I have nothing but time these days to wonder what I missed that might have changed things. What is it that I did not see, that I could not make myself see?" He is of course talking about his wife and wondering whether he ever really truly knew her. Which dark truths about his wife's nature did he refuse to face, which led to this tragedy? The Phantom version of Renoir is portrayed very differently than the harsh and domineering version we meet in the game. The Phantom is thoughtful and so much more unsure of itself. The real flesh and blood Renoir seems totally sure of himself and his decisions at all times, like he knows for an absolute certainty that he is doing the right thing. But the Phantom is constantly questioning himself, second-guessing his past decisions and his relationship with his family, thinking himself in circles, obsessing over past mistakes. It reveals that Renoir is not nearly as confident as he presents himself to be. Alright, now let's examine the fourth and final Axon, the Reacher, or She Who Reaches for the Stars. This Axon is very different from the others. The previous three were all representations of who Aline, Clea, and Verso really are, or at least who Renoir perceives them to be, whereas the Reacher is a representation of who Renoir wants his youngest daughter to become. In truth, Alicia is not someone reaching for the stars. She is really the exact opposite. She is someone who spends most of her time shut up in her room, reading stories, hiding from the world. She is unable to meet the high expectations of her family, as evidenced by the very harsh and critical way Clea speaks to her in this scene, or by the fact that this tiny frame in the bottom right is the only painting of hers that Aline ever considered good enough to be displayed. Alicia is a character plagued by feelings of self-doubt and alienation, while Renoir is desperate to show his daughter that she can become something more, that she could learn to fly. This is Renoir at his most positive portrayal, a father trying to inspire his children to be the best versions of themselves, rather than dictate their path for them. The Phantom here is much more sober. He says that Alicia will never forgive herself for her role in her brother's death, never overcome her scars, and he knows there's nothing he can do to ease her burden. Okay, so putting all of this together, what do the Axons actually tell us about Renoir's character? Well, he is definitely a truly great painter. His creations are beautiful and powerful, and also imbued with meaning and purpose. He is utterly devoted to his family, they consume all of his thoughts, but somewhat surprisingly, he also views those family members through a critical lens. He is very aware of their flaws. He is unsure of himself and his choices, blames himself for his son's death, and worries for the future of his surviving children. Renoir may be totally certain that erasing the canvas is the right choice, but he does not seem to be certain of very much else. Alright, before ending this video, I would like to do the same thing I did with Aline in the last video. I want to follow Renoir's story in the game from start to finish, from his first scene to his last, to examine how his character develops over the course of the narrative. Okay, so in his very first appearance, the audience will not even know who or what he is, because in his first scene, Renoir appears in the form of the Curator, and this is the only form that the audience will see for the first two acts of the game. In the exact same way that Aline's body has faded and crumbled as a result of her extended time inside the canvas, so has his. And in the same way that her heart, a part of herself, is still living inside the painted manor even as her body is trapped at the top of the monolith, his heart is living inside this other version of the manor even as his body is trapped at the bottom of the monolith. When Expedition 33 is attacked by the painted version of Renoir on the beach, Verso grabs Maëlle and transports her to this manor, and places her into the care of the Curator, who is of course her father. Renoir watches over his daughter for at least a couple days, keeping her safe, and he even trains with her to prepare her for the dangers outside. However, his introduction is still really creepy. I want to play a short clip of that introduction now, just so you can listen to the sound design, because the audio here is really fascinating. The Curator never speaks, but he is always accompanied by these strange, low, deep, shuddering noises, almost like something you would hear at the bottom of the ocean, which is appropriate because Renoir is trapped underneath the ocean of the canvas. Anyway, just listen to this.
It's all a blur. I remember everyone at the beach. Then I woke up here. With him. He's been helping me a lot. He reinforced all my pictos.
What is he?
I'm not sure. He doesn't really talk.
Between the weird sound design and the equally creepy visual design, the black hole where his face should be, the way he silently looms in the background, I think the developers were trying to communicate to the audience that, hey, there is something off about this guy. He is dangerous. Though most players will probably be reassured by how surprisingly helpful he is. He hangs out in the expedition camp, forging our party's weapons, helping make them more powerful, because he wants the expeditioners to succeed in their mission of defeating the Paintress, so his wife can finally be forced out of the canvas, giving him the opportunity to erase it and all of them along with it. He is helping these characters participate in their own destruction. He is the one who reforges the hearts of his own creations, the Axons, into a blade for Mael to wield, which allows her to access the Paintress. And he is the one who shows her how to erase the painted version of Renoir inside the monolith. The confrontation between the two Renoirs is pretty fascinating. The painted Renoir makes a final desperate attempt to convince the real Renoir not to erase the canvas, but the latter is completely unmoved. Without uttering a single word, he destroys his painted copy, who does not resist. And I will discuss that scene in more detail whenever I do a video on the painted Renoir. Moving on, it is not until after the Paintress has been defeated, and after all of the human characters have been wiped out of existence, and Mael's true identity as Alicia has been revealed, that the Curator finally reveals his own true identity. I think the reason why he is able to appear in his normal human form here is that with Oline gone, he now has total control over the chroma of the canvas, which he is able to use to repaint himself. In this scene, Mael attempts to convince him to allow the canvas to continue to exist, but he is not even willing to consider the idea. One of the most important things to notice here is the way he constantly interrupts her during this conversation. I mean, he interrupts her so many times that it cannot even be classified as a conversation. She cannot finish a sentence. He is just totally dominating the discussion, refusing to let her explain herself. This touches on that controlling aspect of his character, and it is a big mistake. By refusing to even listen to his daughter's perspective, he pushes her away, creates a whole new war over the fate of the painting, and this one he is destined to lose. If Renoir had taken a moment to have an actual discussion with his daughter, to take her perspective seriously, instead of just plowing right over her feelings, this scene may have played out very differently. His need to control, even if it is well intended, is his greatest flaw. However, in his defense, he is also totally correct. His wife and daughter are both incapable of resisting the temptation of the canvas, and the only way to 100% ensure they stay away is to destroy it. This is what makes him such a great villain. It is very easy to sympathize with what he is trying to do, even if you disagree with his methods. Again, the real victims here are the innocent inhabitants of the painting who got caught in the middle. Next, let's examine their final confrontation. I'm going to try to break this scene down piece by piece. Okay, so early in the scene, Renoir reveals that he too was once lost in a canvas, lost in a fantasy which felt so much better than reality that he refused to leave. And later he will say that it was his wife that broke him out of that fantasy and saved his life. This is a very important revelation, because it shows that when he forces her out of this canvas, he is not just behaving like a controlling husband, he is actually following in her footsteps, following her instructions. She is the one who taught him about the dangers of the painted world. In his perspective, he is just doing for her exactly what she once did for him, even if she does not want his help. There is a moment where he says that he does not even want to destroy Verso's canvas, but he feels he has no other choice. He truly believes it is the only thing he can do to save his family. This is the most compelling kind of antagonist, the ones who are fighting for what they believe is right, even if they have to cause harm to others to accomplish their goals. There is another moment in the scene where Ciel and Lune take center stage, and they argue in Mael's defense. And to his credit, Renoir takes them seriously. He does not treat them as meaningless artificial creations, but as real people who have something worth saying. He listens to them and even acknowledges that what they say is true. And in this short interaction, I think there is an implicit acknowledgement of their humanity, but it still does not deter him. Even if he does believe they are alive and sentient and real, he will destroy them if it means saving his family. Finally, this scene contains the only moment in the entire game when he loses control of himself. Just watch it for yourself.
You treat me as if I'm still 5.
I treat you as if the shadow from the worst day of our lives is going to suffocate you and take you from us too! Enough. I said enough.
I think this is an important development for his character because otherwise he is portrayed as a man very much in control of his emotions, very measured and considered, except in this single moment when he loses himself to his anger and frustration. It makes him seem more human and flawed. It shows that he is being driven just as much by his emotions as by his reason. He is so sick and tired of his family's self-destructive behavior. He has had enough of it, and so he's going to force them onto the correct path. This is what the Clea Phantom meant when she said that Renoir's fear is causing him to try to bend everyone to his will. In the end, Renoir is not so much defeated as he gives up. Against his own better judgment, he chooses to trust his daughter and allows her to remain inside the canvas. However, as Verso states in the very next scene, Renoir does not really believe that she will be able to resist the temptation of this fantasy world. He is choosing to believe a lie because it is easier than facing the truth. And the truth is that his daughter will never leave the canvas. She is going to die here. It is important to remember that, as benevolent as they may seem, there is a selfish quality within Renoir's motivations. Remember that clip we watched earlier where he shouts,
Want it to be fixed, I need it to be fixed, I cannot lose you too.
That repeated refrain of I want, I need, tells us so much about his character. He is motivated by what he cannot stand to lose, and just like every other member of his family, he is willing to go to violent extremes to ensure his emotional needs are satisfied. The more I examine this story, the more I feel that it's not so much that any of these characters individually are villains, not Renoir or the Paintress or anyone else. But instead it is more like the entire Dessendre family are collectively the villain of the story. They are all well-intentioned, none of them are trying to hurt anyone, but they are also all selfish. The ideal ending would be for all of these people to leave and not come back, and not erase the canvas, but to just leave it alone. But the Dessendres are incapable of doing that, and so the people of the painting just keep getting caught in the middle of their family drama over and over again. What should be a fairly ordinary disagreement between father and daughter in the real world becomes a matter of life and death inside the canvas. It all just seems so unfair to characters like Gustave, Sophie, Lune, and Ciel, and all of the expeditions who came before, who pour so much emotion and energy into a battle for survival just to get cast aside for the sake of the emotional needs of the Dessendre family. Anyway, next time I will be examining another member of that family, and perhaps you could call her the most obscure member of the family, because we are going to analyze Clea, the painter of Nevrons. So, see you then.
Dim dim da 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 dim dim da 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 dim da di dum. Dim dim da 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 dim dim da 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 dim da di dum. Dans là-haut sera ravi les toits à ce